Welcome to Cartoon People. It's a show about newspaper cartoons. With me is Charles Peattie. He's the Alex cartoonist in the Daily Telegraph. I'm Adam. I'm not a cartoonist, but I enjoy looking at them. And we're going to be talking about the birth of the Alex cartoon. So can you explain a little bit about how you got the cartoon commission? How did that come about?
Well, I came into cartooning roughly at a good time, in that the 80s was a time when newspapers were being started. There was a new newspaper called Today that got started. There was a paper called The Independent that got started, and then there was a paper called the London Daily News, and probably other ones. And I went along to all three of them. The first two turned me down. The last one was the London Daily News. And I took along an idea for them, which, to be honest, I didn't really like. But they told me the kind of thing they would like if I got it right. And I had a couple of weeks, and I went back with an idea. And that was those were the days where you could just phone somebody up in a newspaper without knowing them. There'd be a switchboard, and you could get put through to the art director. And people would see your work.
This is the days when you could phoning people up. That seems incredibly old-fashioned.
I know.
That's definitely showing your age. The fact you made a phone call and somebody answered the phone, and as a result of that phone
call,
they
sent me a pigeon.
They sent me a pigeon, exactly, a telegram. So they didn't. What was the idea that you pitched that they didn't like?
I had an idea for a strip called Toy Town, which all the characters in it were toys, like teddy bears and wibbly wobbly man and that kind of thing. And it was also, I think it was a detective story set in Toy Town, a little bit like Toy Story, but not as good as Toy Story.
I was going to say from the Toy Story, maybe they passed on a surefire hit.
But they didn't like it. They said, can you do something that's, they wanted something that was like Bristow in the Standard was, one that had been going a long time.
So something about people in like working daily lives that would sort of speak to their readership?
Something very London.
Very London.
They wanted London. Actually, they wanted youth as well.
Right.
And they wanted us to go away and think about youths. And we did, and we thought we'd do a strip that was going to be a bit like, I suppose, This Life or something.
Right.
With 4 different characters who'd be like, and we thought, right, we'll do a girl that really wants to be famous, someone that's really very politically motivated and a bit of an activist. We had a kind of subsidiary character who was a kind of boring yuppie in a suit that lived upstairs, probably owned the house they lived in, and we were trying to think who was going to be our everyman character. And we just literally couldn't think of it. We were going, teacher, architect, we just couldn't think of anyone that would be a good everymanish person. But in the meantime, the yuppie seemed to be getting a few jokes, and the deadline was elapsing. We had an idea about doing a taxi driver as a character.
So were you testing these characters on other people before you pitched them to newspaper?
We were just sort of trying to chuck ideas desperately to each other. And I was working with a guy called Mark, and he didn't really like the idea either, and in fact bailed out. But I went back to the London Daily News and said, look, we've got this great character called Alex, and he's a yuppie. And they were kind of, okay, fine. And then they said, you've got to think of a week's worth of jokes for us in a week's time. I seem to remember, or maybe it was 2 weeks in 2 weeks' time. And they did that, and they tested them on various people in the office. They said they'd give us a tryout. We thought we were going to be starting as, I think, September of 86. In fact, it kept being delayed. So anyway, that's how I started. And actually, in the meantime, the guy I was going to be doing it with, he bailed out and he got a proper job somewhere.
So it was Alex that tested best from those 4 characters. That sort of like flat share
style. It wasn't like we tested it, just we couldn't think of anything funny about any of the other characters. I mean, and we didn't really know how to make up jokes very much those days either.
Do you think the reason that the Alex character resonated is because it was the time of the yuppie, or the concept of the city professional becoming more popular, and they were having the Thatcherite era, and it just hit I hate to use the word zeitgeist, but I don't know what other word there is to use.
I wanted to use it, now you've stopped me.
Got there first, sorry.
Yeah, I think that was it. And I also think that the city page, we got stuck on the city page, and I think the city page was a sort of seen as a boring page, and we were going to be a cartoon that was going to enliven a boring page, basically.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing about Alex, the character, and you can perhaps show us a little bit about how you kind of created him as a character, is that he's comes from a not left-wing perspective. I mean, the character itself, he's like an amoral sort of Thatcherite if he has any views. That's unusual, isn't it, for a cartoon?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely was then. That evolved, but it evolved quite quickly. I would say, I mean, yeah, the early 80s anyway, culturally, everybody was on the left. I mean, there were Sloane Rangers and there were obviously Thatcherite.
When you say everybody, obviously not voters.
Everyone who was worth thinking about, darling.
We don't mean that. Everyone is welcome by on this channel. Anyone can watch.
Well, it meant stand-up comedy, which was then called alternative comedy. And it also meant pop stars and pop music and that kind of thing. And everybody was, it was, a time of...
Well, it's interesting how things have changed, isn't it? Because now they haven't changed at all.
But anyway, I personally, I was quite a sort of liberally sort of chap as well myself. But it was quite funny having a character that was so unabashedly, selfish and materialistic and status conscious.
And the world he inhabits is very different to the world of the sort of, like the arts community.
The sort of downbeat, boho kind of thing. Yeah, definitely. And here, there was a joke we did where he was saying, oh, how marvellous, I wish I could do what I wanted to do and that kind of thing. And then it ended up with him saying, I love patronising the arts.
And typically cartoon characters aren't often very successful either. I mean, I suppose Bristow had a sort of decent-ish job, but generally they're not that successful, are they? That's unusual for him to have a good job and be earning decent money and being quite competent as well.
I mean, they were kind of either lovable losers or hateful losers, but in terms of sitcoms and comedy at that time, it was kind of,
but as a general pattern in a newspaper cartoon, if it was the kind of characters weren't particularly high status or good at their jobs, were they? I mean, not that Alex is particularly.
Not that there were that many cartoon strips, but Andy Capp, Bristow, they're the ones that I remember, and they were both. They weren't like high achievers.
Yeah. I don't think. And it sort of goes against a lot of the principles that you're taught in comedy, and insofar as you can teach comedy, in that comedy is typically about failure and people kind of sharing your comedic failings.
Rueful failure.
And if Alex has failings, it's more arrogance and hubris, but he is fundamentally pretty successful and tends to get away with it a lot.
I mean, he was a winner, that was the idea of him.
And that kind of flips on its head a lot of the rules about comedy, doesn't it? That you normally don't have winners.
I was discussing it with Russell, who is the guy that I now work with. And he was suggesting things and saying, oh, maybe we should make him, a little bit awkward with women or something like that. And I was going, actually, you know what? Maybe it's funnier if he just doesn't have those problems at all, and and none of his failings make him at all humble or feeling awkward. I mean, he was unembarrassable, really. Yeah, Alex. Yeah.
Yeah, so that is actually. Also, now talk us through, if you could can you show us a bit about how you came up with how did you come up with a character for Stat from scratch? Yeah. Do you want a fresh bit of paper or not?
Well, I hate to waste paper.
You see, we're very environmentally friendly on this. Are we calling this a podcast? Because technically, is it a vodcast? I haven't even decided what it's called.
Sounds kind of vaguely alcoholic.
It does a vodcast. I don't even know. We started a show. We don't even know. Well, we know what it's called. It's called Cartoon People. But I wanted to say podcast at the top, which is mostly why I got the intro wrong, just so we're clear. And then I realised I didn't know what it was.
Yeah. I still don't.
We still don't know what it is.
Is it a vidcast or
vidcast? No, I think it's vodcast. But vodcast. I feel.
Yeah. Okay. Look, let me draw Alex.
Yeah. So explain. You created a character from scratch. He wasn't in your portfolio. So how do you create a cartoon character?
I wasn't being massively original, which is what all cartoonists will tell you, is they always start doing what they've sort of been doing already. But I had I did a sort of squint, which was kind of based on a Clint Eastwood squint, basically like that. I gave him a big nose, which was roughly speaking.
And that's his signature feature in a way, isn't it? His most identifiable feature of Alex is the huge nose.
Yeah, not that I thought about it at the time. I mean, I was just having a big nose moment in my cartoon career, which stuck with me for years.
Because Celeb has a pretty big nose as well, doesn't he?
He only started with like a few short years after Alex did, I think.
Still in your big nose phase?
Yeah, though in fact if it had hit me about, I don't know, 6 months earlier, I was actually having a sort of small nose phase.
So it's a bit like with Picasso's blue period or the Cubist period, cartoonists have big and small nose, big eyes, small eyes.
I like the comparison, yeah. I mean, I'm sure
very similar.
Picasso would be very flattered if you were alive.
So talk me through, if you let's say it's a whatever you've got to do the cartoon for the Monday edition of the newspaper.
No, I mean you do cartoon. I mean in those days sometimes I'd have my roughs cleared, sometimes I wouldn't. Nowadays I do get my roughs cleared, but in those days I did for a while.
And what is a rough? Because
when you do a rough of a cartoon, I don't know if I've got any lurking around here, but this is one of Russell's.
Right.
It's what a cartoon looks like in rough form, you know. Before
so it's almost like storyboarding the cartoon before you actually do it. Would you say like a kind of
exactly.
demo version?
And you check the scripting. And we had a rule. I mean, we had a number of rules, Russell and I. But one of them was that if we had an idea for a joke, we would draw it out and show it to the other one rather than tell the other one. If you see what I mean. So that
to see that it worked as a visual joke rather than just a written joke.
It's. I mean, there are all sorts of things that kind of, when you're actually speaking a joke, you kind of you create a sort of emphasis verbally or something like that, which doesn't appear when you just have it on the printed page. So
it can't work. So cartoon jokes have to work without a specific emphasis. Then they've got a different.
They have to work without comedy timing or something.
Right.
I suppose, you know,
like a cold read, basically. They have to work. So someone can pick them up, read them, not have any comedic timing.
Whatsoever. And then they'd work, and you wouldn't go the wrong way.
I was going to make a snide comment about TV commissioning, but then I'll
commit commercial suicide.
Commit commercial suicide. Well, except I've done it now, so I've already committed. That's commercial suicide committed. But anyway, if you can imagine somebody with no comedic timing whatsoever who doesn't work in contemporary TV commissioning, picking up one of your jokes, it would still work.
Yeah.
It doesn't depend.
Well, it should do. Yeah, and so I mean, quite often. You know, I don't get this, or Russell will go, what?
Right.
You know, and that's why, and then you'd explain it and they go, okay.
So, but that's the difference then with a cartoon joke, is it has a kind of different structure from, say, someone delivering a funny comment on a panel show or in a stand-up
all sorts of things are funny in real life or in a comedy program, which aren't really very funny in a, full frame.
And it has to match with the image as well, kind of the sort of...
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to... You put a lot in when you do the actual proper drawing afterwards in terms of, expressional acting, I suppose you'd call it.
But can you, walk me through, the actual, the process of generating that cartoon for that day?
Yeah.
You do the rough, you get it approved. So the rough is the demo version, and that would be approved.
Yeah.
And...
Then I draw it out in pen and ink.
Draw it in pen and ink.
In the old days, back then, in fact, I used not to get them approved because there wasn't time, and that caused problems.
Can you imagine?
All sorts of things to get through.
So then you do your pen and ink drawing in your studio wherever you're working. How did you pre-digital? This is what I want to explain.
Super quickly. I do my.
How did you get it into?
I'd photocopy it, and in those days, a bike would actually come and collect it from me. So somebody on a bike, usually smoking a cigarette, would stand by me as I was finishing it off.
I just remember cigarettes are wrong. There's so many things, it feels like I'm in a black and white documentary now.
And then they'd have them.
A smoking dispatch rider would arrive.
We'd run off home as quickly as we could.
And then the newspaper, they've got this this ink image turns up at the newspaper. How do they then get that into the printed newspaper that somebody reads?
I think in those days what they did was called PMT, which is a photomagnetic transfer, I think, which was kind of like a big photograph. And we used to use those as well. And you had a great big camera on a rostrum in a black box that you photographed with. And they did very, very perfect, like a scan does, but actually better.
High resolution, scan.
Yeah. It wasn't digital. It was like a literal kind of photograph, I suppose.
Yeah.
And they would create the whole page. All the columns and everything. They'd send off the columns to the guys downstairs, I think, to typeset them.
And that's still manual typesetting, or did they go on? I think it was a hybrid.
It was pasted. Everything was pasted. But I don't know. I think around about that time they were starting to move things around on a screen. But as far as our cartoon was concerned, I guess they probably had it in some form of. It wouldn't have been a JPEG. It would have been a TIFF, I expect.
And so when that cartoon has been scanned on that sort of high-resolution PMT device, about what time of day is that's happening in terms of that kind of time?
Depends when our deadline was. I mean, really, really did. I think the London Daily News, it was quite late. I think we had to get it over at 8 o'clock the night before it was going to appear, and they'd stick it in the morning, roughly speaking.
So that's happening. There's people working at the newspaper in the evening to get it ready for the morning edition.
I think that the morning edition of the Evening Standard was probably out around about midday. I can't really remember. We mostly work to a 6 o'clock deadline, but sometimes you can phone up and say, look, sorry, it's
running a bit late.
It's about the news, we're running late, but it'll be there.
And when you pitched Alex, it was just the one main character who made the cut from those 4.
Yeah.
But you brought other characters in. How did you do that?
They were basically just, you needed somebody that was talking to Alex or asking him the right questions, mostly. I'll draw them quickly. We did actually have, I think there was a sort of female character who was I think initially when I was pitching the strip, my idea was that it was Alex's lodger, but, we soon realised that Alex wouldn't have a lovely, pretty girl in his house and at least try and make a move on her. He would definitely do that.
Well, this was the 1980s, so it's different time, different more.
Yeah. But actually, the main thing was that Alex wouldn't like people to think that he'd had to take in a lodger and didn't. So
it was a status thing that he didn't have enough money to afford it. Fair enough.
So, but anyway.
So Alex's love interest was the.
Oh, love. I don't know if love is entirely correct. Whatever love means.
Okay. Partner.
Penny. She was.
I meant love interest in the sense I could say lover, but that sounds very French, and Alex is not
you're
French.
kind of putting her in competition with Alex's car, which might well be his love interest.
So Alex is female, as they might have said on Friday night dinner.
Yeah. She was basically like this. She had a sort of sensitive sort of face, and
her nose is much smaller proportionately, isn't it?
Yes, I don't know what that's about. It's probably some Freudian thing.
But it's almost, compared to Alex's, it's quite buttony, isn't it?
I think I couldn't find a way of making her look even halfway attractive when she had a great big hoot and like.
So that was the...
Alex's, yeah.
Right.
And I used to draw Penny like that. And she, in those days, she wore the kind of clothes that cool girls wore, which was...
Sloane Rangery or not? Not
she
quite.
She was a hybrid Slow Ranger, but she was also slightly Madonna-ish, and she had fingerless gloves and denim jackets. And
okay. So a little bit trendier than Alex, actually. A bit more.
Well, she started as an artist, and that's a sort of leftover from when she was his lodger in the original strip.
And was one of the reasons you made it that, so that you could have a contrast? It's helpful to, presumably it is helpful to have a contrast. If you were all just city characters, then you'd have nothing to bounce off against.
Yeah, I think.
Or was it just the leftover from the old?
Leftover old jokes that we had about art and that kind of thing.
Nothing wrong with recycling.
Yeah. So yeah, that was Penny.
Reimagining. Yeah, and the other main character is Clive, who's his colleague at work.
This is actually that looks too good.
We could see a little bit of him.
Drawing like that. Clive was a voice off initially.
So he didn't have a face at all.
Yeah, he was a speech bubble coming in from the side, literally.
It's like Maris in Frasier, who's never seen, isn't she?
Yeah, or kind of Rumpel's. Oh no, Rumpel's wife was in existence.
Maris, I think, is never seen. Even when she's in the room, she's in a flotation tank. You never actually see her.
I can't remember. Yeah, but
in fact, I don't think she even speaks. She's there, but
Clive. He only existed like that for a few jokes actually, but. After a while, I drew somebody in who was talking to Alex, and I just drew someone that didn't look like Alex, i.e. I gave him a sharp nose and sort of a blunt nose. Alex had sort of wavy, or he had sort of floppy hair, I suppose.
So you're saying about these characters that you actually want them to be a bit deadpan in a way, so you can't read their expressions. So Clive, by having the glasses, you can't...
Yeah, you
sort of hides.
You didn't even know what he was... And the same with Alex. I mean, Alex's eyes...
quite small and... not very expressive.
Well, Alex's eyes are typically, like that.
Yeah.
The way he's, you can't see what he's thinking. Or occasionally, I'd sort of draw Alex with sort of sleepy eyes, I suppose.
Right.
So this is another way of drawing Alex, which is his slightly superior look. I honestly think it was more than a decade before I drew Alex with his mouth, with his eyes kind of...
more open.
Yeah, actually open in shock. I think it was sort of took all that time before anything even happened to him that was worthy of that sort of reaction. But yeah.
Do you think the reason it did land, because obviously you're still doing the cartoon now,
yeah,
is because there was timing? You were you got in there when the sort of yuppie city culture was really starting to take hold. There was the Big Bang.
No,
That's right,
because we were just really fun.
I mean, I know you're very good as well. I didn't mean it like that, but it was that you had a combination of you had a good idea meets social changes at the same time, and then that gives it longevity.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I mean, it did actually feel when I started doing the strip, it did feel, and it does sometimes feel like this when you are doing a strip, that you're not even making it up.
What you're trying to do with a cartoon there, aren't you, is to capture something that sort of speaks to people about their contemporary environment.
Yeah, as if I thought like that at that time, but I don't know what I was thinking at the time.
But if it resonates and it's been successful, it must have done that.
Keep the gig somehow, yeah.
All right, you want to keep working.
Honestly,
well, I mean, Claire in the Community is almost like not quite, but it's almost like a mirror image of Alex, in that it's about a social worker and it's in the Guardian.
Yeah.
So that sort of
and they do love characters that that speak to their readers and are like their readers.
So that feels like that's the mirror in a way.
Yeah, I mean, funnily enough, when we started doing Alex, we were sending in cartoons and we heard that Bob Maxwell didn't actually like them, and the reason he didn't like them was he was going, well, why are they being so rude about bankers? They're the people who want to read our paper. Right. And he was, which is true, and they were the people they wanted to read the paper, but he didn't realise that they actually liked it like that. I mean, it was a very strange time starting. I mean, I don't want to be one of these, it's like climbing Everest every day, darlings, kind of people, but it was quite intense, actually, having to do a cartoon every day, or at least I found it intense and difficult. And
that's pretty demanding. That's pretty demanding to come at the top.
So scary. Also, I mean, the main thing was doing it in public, and every now and then you'd actually be on a tube train, and you'd see someone opening the page to your cartoon, and they'd look at it, and I would actually have to look away. I just couldn't.
Well, I remember when you're doing like a topical show for Radio 4, and doing the Now show for this is 20 years ago, and it was fun and exciting. Yeah. But there obviously would be a moment you're thinking, when it's going out, and you might even catch people listening to it, thinking, God, I hope they laugh at this point.
People kind of go sort of, oh, I quite liked it when it started, but actually I think it's gone off a bit, don't you? Kind of thing. Like, Jesus,
you die inside.
2 months,
Yeah, give me a chance. And also, you can't.
The saddest thing I'll tell you is that when I was doing it, I used to go get sandwiches from a van actually. She was a shop this time, and there was an incredibly pretty girl who was serving the sandwiches in the shop that I was going into to buy a sandwich from. Not only that, but she also had one of my cartoons was actually stuck up on the wall next to her that she must have liked. It was probably about sandwiches, and I remember thinking two things. One is, this is my dream moment, right? Kind of like I'm a famous person. I say, do you like that cartoon? That's one of mine, And the second thing I realised was, in a million years, I was not going to say anything about it.
Because you're so British. So, see, if this was Hollywood, this is where you'd say, and I spoke to her, and, been happily married.
She's now married, yeah.
You didn't?
No, absolutely not. No, I mean, it wasn't only her as well. It was all the other people in the queue. I was kind of thinking, oh, God.
That's the most British conversation I've ever had. There was a pretty woman that I thought was very nice.
She was not pretty, she was heavenly.
Heavenly gorgeous, right? She had my cartoon on the wall, so that was like there was an open opportunity.
Opening,
you saw her every day. And this is why British people will never find love and happiness, because even when you had a perfect opportunity.
Well, I don't know. I mean,
Is there a moral from that story?
Well, the main moral was that I'm definitely not cut out to be a famous person.
Actually, I was hoping for an upbeat ending, but now we've got a wistful and sort of. But that's good. That's a kind of what-if moment that you have. Well, you could have spoken to her. She might have been a terrible person. You don't know. Probably not. If you're watching this show, woman in the sandwich van who had Charles's cartoon on the wall, please get in touch.
I'm desperate.
Actually, no. It would be really, really interesting to interview now if you even remember that, but you probably don't. Anyway,
it wasn't a van, it was a shop.
Okay, I thought it was a van. Right. Anyway, I think that's probably ending. We haven't worked out how to end this show, which we don't even know what's called. But I think that's enough.
Okay, fine.